My name is Tyler Garrett, and I was 17 when my life changed forever. I didn't think much about God or faith. And Christmas? That was just an excuse for my parents to drag me to church and pretend everything was perfect. Honestly, I didn't care about the traditions, the decorations, or the prayers they clung to so tightly. I thought I knew better. I was too focused on myself, my friends, my music, my freedom. That Christmas Eve, I had a fight with my parents. My mom begged me to stay for dinner, but I wasn't in the mood to sit through another one of my dad's lectures about responsibility and respect. "Tyler, when will you learn that life isn't all about you?" he said, his voice sharp with disappointment. I just rolled my eyes and grabbed my car keys. "Don't wait up," I muttered as I slammed the door behind me. The cold air bit at my face as I climbed into my car, the only thing in my life that felt like freedom. I cranked up the music and sped down the icy streets of town, leaving their voices and their rules behind. The roads were slick, but I didn't care. I had driven in worse conditions, or so I thought. My mind was clouded with frustration, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. That's when it happened. A patch of black ice caught my tires, and the car spun out of control. My heart raced as I yanked the wheel, but nothing worked. The world blurred around me, and then there was the crash, a deafening impact as my car slammed into a tree. Pain shot through my chest, and the world went dark. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the car anymore. I wasn't sure where I was. Everything felt heavy, suffocating, like the air itself was pressing against me. The world around me wasn't a world at all, just an endless void of darkness. My first thought was that I must be dreaming, but deep down, I knew this was no dream. This was something else, something real. When I woke up, or whatever you'd call it, I wasn't in my car. I wasn't even sure I was alive. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It wasn't like a winter chill. It was deeper, like it was inside me, freezing me from the core. Everything was dark, so dark it felt like the void itself was alive, pressing against me from all sides. My body felt weightless, but at the same time, I couldn't move. I just floated there, surrounded by nothing. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. Panic surged through me as I struggled to understand what was happening. Where am I? I thought, over and over. But the silence swallowed my thoughts like they didn't exist. The void wasn't just empty, it felt heavy, suffocating. It wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced, and deep down, I knew this wasn't a dream. Then the silence shattered. It started faint, like a whisper far away, but it grew louder with each passing second. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, echoed around me. They weren't speaking to each other. They were speaking to me. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but then they became clear, cutting through the darkness like knives. You ignored them. You hurt them. You didn't care. The words stabbed at me, each one heavier than the last. Faces began to flash in front of me, people I knew. My mom, her face wet with tears after our countless fights. My dad, his stern expression hiding his disappointment. My little sister, looking hurt after I lashed out at her for something dumb. And then there were others. Friends I'd betrayed, strangers I'd mocked, people I barely remembered but had left worse for knowing me. "No, this isn't fair," I said, or tried to. My voice still wouldn't come out, but my thoughts screamed inside my head. I didn't mean it. I didn't know. The voices didn't care. They grew louder, layering over each other until they became a deafening roar. You didn't mean it, but you did it anyway. Their words forced me to face something I had avoided my entire life. The truth about myself. I wanted to run, to escape this place, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was endless, and I was trapped in it. Then, just as suddenly as the voices had begun, they stopped. For a moment, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same oppressive void as before. This silence carried a weight of expectation, like something or someone was about to appear. That's when I saw it. A faint light in the distance. It wasn't like the headlights of a car or the glow of a street lamp. This light was alive, pulsing gently, growing brighter with each passing second. It wasn't just light. It was warmth, peace, and power all at once. I couldn't look away. It pulled at me, not like a magnet, but like it was calling to something deep inside me. As it grew closer, I heard a voice. "Tyler," it said, deep and resonant, yet gentle enough to calm the storm inside me. It wasn't like the other voices. This one didn't accuse or condemn. It spoke with authority, yet it felt loving. "You must see the truth." The light brightened, illuminating a path ahead. It was the only direction in this endless void, and I knew I had to follow it. Trembling, I stepped toward the light, leaving the darkness behind. As I moved toward the light, the oppressive weight of the darkness began to fade. The warmth of the light wrapped around me, soothing the fear and chaos that had gripped me moments before. It wasn't just light. It felt alive, like it was reaching into my soul, calming the storm inside me. I didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The light grew brighter, almost overwhelming, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I squinted, trying to make sense of what was ahead. Then I saw him. A figure stepped out of the light. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced, powerful and commanding, yet filled with a kindness that I couldn't explain. His face was radiant, not in the way the sun is bright, but in a way that seemed to reveal everything about me. His gaze met mine, and in that moment, I felt completely exposed. It was like he could see every part of me, every thought, every action, every regret, but instead of judgment, his eyes held love. I knew who he was before he spoke. Deep down, I just knew. "Tyler," he said, his voice rich and resonant, "you have been brought here for a reason." "Are you Jesus?" I asked, though the words felt unnecessary. His presence was enough of an answer. He nodded, and I felt a wave of peace wash over me, even as a sense of awe made my knees feel weak. "You've lived your life without understanding the truth, Tyler. You've turned away from what truly matters, but it is not too late." I opened my mouth to speak, to ask why this was happening to me, but he raised his hand gently, and I fell silent. "Humanity has forgotten the meaning of this season," Jesus said. His voice carried both sorrow and urgency. "Christmas has become a time of greed, of selfishness, of turning away from the very love it was meant to celebrate. People chase after what they can hold in their hands while ignoring the gifts that cannot be bought." I felt his words pierce through me, each one landing like a stone in my heart. "But it's just how things are," I said weakly. "Everyone celebrates Christmas like that." "That is the problem, Tyler," he replied, his gaze never leaving mine. "You have followed the crowd, but now you must see the truth." The light around us shifted, and suddenly I wasn't standing in that radiant space anymore. I was somewhere else entirely, as if I had been transported back to Earth. But this wasn't a peaceful scene. It was chaos. I saw people storming into stores, pushing and shoving, trampling each other for sales. Their faces were twisted with desperation and anger, fighting over things they didn't need. Families sat together in rooms filled with gifts, but instead of joy, there was tension. Parents stared at their phones while children ripped through wrapping paper, tossing aside one gift after another. The glow of televisions and devices filled the rooms, drowning out any connection between them. "This is what the world has made of Christmas," Jesus said, his voice filled with sadness. "A time meant to reflect, love, and selflessness has become a time of greed and division." The scene shifted again, and this time I saw people sitting on the streets, cold and alone. Some held signs asking for help, but no one stopped. Others rummaged through trash, their faces hollow with hunger. A group of children huddled together, trying to stay warm, while people walked by without even a glance. "Do you see, Tyler?" Jesus asked. "While some indulge in excess, others are forgotten." Then the vision changed again, and I saw my own family. They were sitting in the living room, the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner. My mom was crying, her face buried in her hands, while my dad sat silently, staring at the floor. My little sister clung to a stuffed animal, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. "They are mourning you," Jesus said. "This is what your choices have brought them." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered. "I didn't know." "You chose to ignore the love they offered," Jesus replied. "You let pride and anger rule your heart. But now, you must see the cost." I couldn't look away from my family. My mom's sobs, my dad's quiet despair, my sister's innocent pain. It broke something inside me. For the first time, I realized how much my actions had hurt them. It wasn't just about me anymore. I had been part of the problem. The scenes faded, and I was back in the light with Jesus. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by guilt and sorrow. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You must change," Jesus said. "But first, you must understand the depth of what has been lost and what can still be saved." As the visions of earth faded, the light around me grew brighter, warmer, and more alive. The air itself seemed to hum with a peace I had never felt before, a peace that wrapped around me and filled every corner of my being. Jesus extended his hand, and I took it without hesitation. "I want to show you what awaits those who choose love, humility, and service," he said. With a gentle motion, the light around us transformed, and I found myself standing in a place that seemed impossible to describe. It was more than beautiful. It was perfect. There were no walls, no boundaries, just an endless expanse of vivid colors and radiant light. The air was filled with melodies that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, harmonizing in a way that made my heart feel like it might burst. There was no pain, no sorrow, only joy, peace, and a love so profound that it was almost overwhelming. I saw people gathered together, laughing, singing, and embracing one another. Their faces glowed with happiness, their movements effortless and graceful. There were no divisions here, no anger or bitterness. Everyone seemed connected, not just to each other, but to the very essence of this place. "This is heaven," Jesus said, his voice filled with a quiet joy. "This is the fulfillment of all that is good, a place where love reigns and selfishness is no more." As I watched, I felt an ache in my chest, a longing to be part of this harmony. "It's incredible," I said, my voice trembling. "But how do you get here?" Jesus turned to me, his gaze both gentle and firm. "Heaven is for those who live by love, humility, and service. It is not earned through possessions or pride, but through a heart that seeks to serve others and honor God." His words hit me like a wave. I thought about my life, my selfishness, my anger, my disregard for others. The beauty of this place was so far removed from who I had been. "I don't deserve this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. No one earns heaven through perfection, Tyler. It is a gift for those who choose to turn away from darkness and embrace the light. The choice is yours. I looked at the people, the joy and peace they radiated. Could I ever be like them? Could I ever belong in a place like this? The thought both inspired and terrified me. The light dimmed and a chill ran down my spine. The warmth of heaven was gone, replaced by a suffocating heaviness. The air grew thick, and a stench I couldn't place but instinctively recoiled from filled my senses. I clung to Jesus, my hands trembling as the world around us changed. The ground beneath my feet was jagged and unstable, cracked with fiery veins that glowed like molten lava. In the distance, twisted structures rose against a blood-red sky. The screams started softly at first, then grew louder, piercing and unrelenting. "This is hell," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The place prepared for those who choose pride, greed, and indifference over love." The first thing I noticed were the figures. They writhed in torment, their faces frozen in expressions of pain and despair. They weren't just suffering physically. It was as though their very souls were being torn apart. I wanted to look away, but something held my gaze. Then I saw them. Faces I recognized. Among the countless souls, there were people I had admired, figures I had looked up to or envied. A famous influencer I had followed religiously was there, their perfectly curated persona gone, replaced by a hollow, anguished figure. They clutched at nothing, their eyes wide with terror. "They led many astray," Jesus said. "They spread a culture of materialism and selfishness, celebrating the things that pulled people away from the truth." My stomach turned as I recognized more faces. Teachers, leaders, people I thought were good. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These were people who, like me, had lived for themselves. The cries around me grew louder and the air grew hotter. I turned to Jesus, desperate for answers. Why are they here? Didn't they know better? They knew, but they chose not to change, he said. Each soul here is bound by the choices they made in life. They clung to their pride, their greed, and their hatred, refusing to let go even when the truth was revealed. I felt tears stream down my face. Am I like them? I asked. Is this where I'm headed? Jesus didn't answer immediately. His silence was answer enough. The path you were on led here, Tyler, he said, but you still have a choice. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I stumbled, overwhelmed by the weight of what I had seen. I thought about the life I had lived, the choices I had made, and the people I had hurt. The contrast between the beauty of heaven and the agony of hell was too much to bear. You must decide, Jesus said, his voice steady but urgent. Will you continue on the path of selfishness and pride, or will you turn toward love, humility, and service? As I stood there, surrounded by the chaos and despair of hell, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back to the way I was. The fiery chaos of hell faded, and once again, I found myself standing in the warm, radiant light. My body trembled, my mind racing with everything I had seen and heard. Jesus stood before me, his presence calming my fear, but not erasing it. I felt like a shattered version of myself, stripped bare and raw. Tyler, he said, his voice filled with compassion, there is something you must understand. The world has lost its way, and the meaning of Christmas has been forgotten. He gestured, and the light shifted around us, forming images that began to play like a living memory. I saw a small, humble stable illuminated by a soft golden glow. Inside, a young woman cradled a baby, her face filled with awe and wonder. A man knelt beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Around them were shepherds, their faces lit with joy, and animals quietly observing the scene. "This is where it began," Jesus said, "not in grandeur or wealth, but in humility. God's greatest gift came to the world not as a king in a palace, but as a child in a manger." The image shifted, showing the Magi traveling through the desert, their gifts carried carefully as they followed the star. These wise men understood the importance of giving, not for their own glory, but to honor what is holy and good. Then the light dimmed and the images changed. I saw bustling shopping malls, people fighting over sales, and stacks of wrapped presents towering under trees. The joy of the stable was replaced by the chaos of greed. Families sat together in silence, their faces glued to screens, ignoring the people beside them. The true spirit of Christmas was one of love, generosity, and faith, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. But now it is buried beneath materialism and selfishness. The world has turned away from the light and embraced the darkness. I hung my head, shame filling my heart. "I've been part of it," I said quietly. "I've been selfish. I didn't care about anyone but myself." Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. "You have seen the truth, Tyler. You have been given a chance to change and to help others find their way back to what truly matters." I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. "But what can I do? I'm just one person." "You can be a light," he said. "You can share what you have seen. The choice is yours. Return to Earth and carry this message, or remain here, free from the struggles of the world, but unable to help those you love." My heart raced. The thought of going back, of facing my family and the life I had left behind, was overwhelming. But the thought of staying here, of doing nothing while the world continued to spiral further into darkness, was even worse. "I'll go back," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'll do whatever I can to make things right." Jesus smiled, and for the first time, I felt a spark of hope. "Then go, Tyler. Share the truth and let love guide your steps." The light around me began to fade, and I felt a jolt, like I was being pulled back into my body. The warmth of Jesus' presence lingered, but it was replaced by a harsh, sterile brightness. My eyes fluttered open, and I was met with the blinding white of hospital lights. "Tyler! Oh my God, Tyler!" my mom's voice cried out, her face coming into view. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she leaned over me, clutching my hand. My dad was there too, his normally stern face softened with relief, his eyes red and glassy. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, like I hadn't used it in days. "What happened?" I croaked. "You were in an accident," my dad said, his voice unsteady. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. They said you..." His words trailed off, and he looked away, unable to finish. "They said we might lose you," my mom whispered, her voice breaking. The memory of what I had seen hit me like a flood. The darkness, the visions of heaven and hell, the face of Jesus. It was all so vivid, so real, and it filled me with both purpose and fear. How could I explain what I had experienced? How could I share this message with anyone, let alone the people who knew me best? Tears filled my eyes as I looked at my parents. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling, "for everything. For how I treated you, for the fights, for not appreciating you. I'm so sorry." My mom sobbed as she hugged me, her warmth grounding me in the reality of the moment. My dad placed a hand on my shoulder, nodding silently. "I've seen things," I said softly, unsure of how much to reveal. "Things that changed me. I need to make things right." They didn't ask for details, at least not then. Maybe they thought I was still delirious, or maybe they just wanted to savor the fact that I was alive. Either way, I felt their forgiveness in the way they held me, and it gave me the courage to take the first step. Later that day, after the doctors checked on me and my family stepped out for a moment, I stared out to the hospital window at the snow falling softly outside. It was Christmas morning, and for the first time, I understood what that meant. I didn't know how I would share what I had seen or if anyone would believe me, but I knew one thing: I had been given a second chance and I wouldn't waste it. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I felt an urgency I couldn't explain. The memory of what I'd seen, hell, heaven, Jesus himself, was as clear as if it had just happened. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself, even if the thought of sharing it terrified me. The first time I spoke about it was with my best friend, Liam. We were sitting in his room, the same place where we'd spent countless hours joking about life and planning our next adventure. But this wasn't a casual conversation. "Liam," I said, my voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. You're going to think I've lost it, but I swear it's true." I told him everything: the crash, the darkness, the voices, and the visions of heaven and hell. When I finished, there was a long silence. He just stared at me, his brow furrowed. Then he laughed. "Come on, Tyler. You expect me to believe you died and talked to Jesus? This sounds like one of those clickbait stories online." His reaction stung, but I couldn't blame him. I would have thought the same thing before. "I'm serious, Liam. I saw things that changed me, and I can't just pretend it didn't happen. You don't have to believe me, but I have to share it." Word spread quickly after that. At first, it was whispers in the school hallways. "Did you hear Tyler Garrett thinks he met Jesus?" Some laughed, calling me crazy or attention-seeking. Others just avoided me altogether. But a few, just a few, stayed after class or stopped me in the cafeteria to ask questions, their voices quiet and curious. One girl, Emily, broke down crying as I told her about the true meaning of Christmas. "My family doesn't even talk to each other anymore," she said. "We just sit in the same room, pretending everything's fine. I don't want that to be my life." That was when I realized I wasn't just sharing my story, I was planting seeds. Inspired by those small moments of connection, I decided to do something bigger. I organized a Christmas event at the community center. It wasn't about lights or presents, it was about helping others. I rallied classmates and neighbors to collect food, coats, and toys for families in need. We decorated the space, not with expensive decorations, but with handwritten messages of love and hope. When Christmas Eve came, the room was packed. People shared stories, hugged, and for the first time, I felt like I was part of something truly meaningful. We read the Christmas story aloud, and I spoke briefly about my experience. "This isn't about what you have or what you get," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "It's about what you give, your time, your love, your kindness." That's what I learned. That's what I saw. In the months and years that followed, my life transformed. The boy who had once been angry and selfish was gone. I wasn't perfect, but I tried every day to live by the lessons Jesus had shown me. As I grew, so did the impact of my story. People started sharing how the event had inspired them to reconnect with their families or reach out to someone they'd ignored. A local news outlet ran a piece on the event, and soon, others in nearby towns started organizing their own gatherings focused on giving back. I stayed in touch with Emily, who told me her family had started eating dinner together again, something they hadn't done in years. Liam, the same friend who had laughed at me, eventually came to one of the events. He pulled me aside afterward and said, "I don't know if I believe everything you said, but I see how much it's changed you, and honestly, that's enough for me to start thinking." Every time I heard a story like that, it felt like a ripple in a pond. a small action spreading farther than I could have imagined. I didn't need everyone to believe my story. I just needed them to feel the truth behind it. Love, humility, and service were what mattered most. As I sat in my room one Christmas Eve years later, watching the snow fall softly outside, I thought back to the day of the crash. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet it was as vivid as ever. The Tyler who had stormed out of the house, angry and prideful, was unrecognizable to me now. I turned on the camera on my laptop. It was time to share the message again, this time with more people than I'd ever reached before. The screen glowed as I hit record, and I spoke directly into the lens.
Yeah.
If you're watching this, I want you to know something, I said, my voice steady. Christmas isn't about what you get, it's about what you give, and not just in December, but every day of your life. Love, kindness, forgiveness, that's what matters. That's what Jesus showed me, and it's what I want to share with you. I paused, letting the words settle before I ended with one final thought. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to find the light. This Christmas, be the reason someone else sees it. As the video uploaded, I leaned back, feeling a peace I hadn't known before the crash. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to hear it, and it was a gift I would keep giving for as long as I could. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even crazier.